The cold, vast emptiness of space stretched out in all directions. It was the void, an endless black sea where no species dared to venture. Yet here humanity found itself, cast into this abyss by a galaxy that saw them as nothing more than insignificant creatures. The universe had turned its back on them, leaving Earth and its people to drift into the darkness with no hope of return. The stars, once a beacon of light, were now distant and unreachable, as if mocking humanity's fate. The planets that once formed the center of civilization seemed so far away, like fragile memories in a forgotten dream. Silence hung in the air, as heavy as the crushing pressure of the void itself. Humanity's ships, stranded and alone, were just tiny specks against the infinity that surrounded them. At first, the humans struggled to understand what had happened. One moment, they were part of the galaxy's intricate web, fighting for survival, building alliances, expanding their influence. And then, in an instant, it was all gone. The mighty galactic empire that had ruled for eons had deemed humanity a threat. They had been cast aside, dumped into the void without a second thought. It wasn't just a punishment, it was an erasure. Humanity was forgotten, abandoned. As the survivors drifted, helpless in the empty blackness, fear began to settle in. There was nothing out here. No stars, no allies, just the silent, consuming darkness. Their ships, damaged by the betrayal and forced into survival mode, were barely holding together. It was only a matter of time before the systems failed completely. Without resources, without help, humanity would perish, their story ending in the cold, forgotten corners of space. But even in the darkest moments, human instinct for survival took over. The engineers and scientists on board the scattered ships quickly set to work, repairing what they could, rebuilding what was lost. They knew that the galaxy outside was out of reach, but they refused to believe their story was finished. The endless void might have swallowed them, but it had not broken them. They adapted. They learned to survive. Still, there was a sense of dread, a crushing weight that pressed down on them. The reality of their isolation began to sink in. No help was coming. No one was looking for them. The galaxy had cast them away like broken tools, and humanity had no choice but to figure out how to survive, even as time stretched on, leaving their chances slimmer by the day. As the ships floated deeper into the void, humanity's worst fears began to take shape. The technology they relied on to survive, their power sources, communication systems, and life support, was slowly failing. The resources they had scavenged were running low. Soon, they would have nothing left. The darkness around them seemed to mock their every effort, reminding them that they were truly alone. Yet, as the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, something unexpected happened. Just as they thought all hope was lost, a faint signal echoed through the silence. A hum, almost like static at first, but then something more. A pattern, a rhythm, a call. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. At first, the humans thought it was just a malfunction, the product of their damaged technology. But as they tuned in more carefully, they realized it was something more. This was not just random noise. It was a signal, coming from somewhere out in the darkness, somewhere beyond their reach. The signal was too clear to be a mistake. It had a purpose. They scrambled to trace its origin. What was it? Who had sent it? Was it another species out there, a forgotten ally, perhaps? Or was it a trap, a trick to lure them into an even worse fate? The thoughts raced through their minds. The void had already taken so much from them. Could this be another cruel game? Or was this their salvation? The signal was coming from deep within the void, from a place so distant that it seemed impossible. Was it a beacon, a cry for help? Or was it something far darker, a warning or a lure set by forces unknown? The humans had no answers, only questions that threatened to consume them, but they could not ignore it. It was the only thing that stood between them and complete despair. There was no time to waste. The engineers and communication officers worked feverishly, trying to get a clear line on the signal. But every time they thought they were getting closer, the signal would fade, only to return, more fragmented than before. It was as if whatever was sending it knew they were trying to trace it, and it was pulling away, testing them, pushing them to their limits. And yet it persisted. It called them, and they knew they had no choice but to follow. The thought of returning to the endless silence of the void was unbearable. This signal, no matter how faint, was a lifeline. It was a thread in the darkness, and they clung to it with all their strength. But the more they listened, the more questions arose. Was the signal truly from another civilization, or was it something else entirely? Could it be some form of intelligence, one so ancient and powerful that it had been hidden from the galaxy for eons? Or worse, was it a trap set by the very forces that had exiled them? The tension grew. The closer they got to pinpointing the signal's origin, the more intense their uncertainty became. It felt like the answer was just out of reach, hiding in the depths of the void. They were caught in a race against time. Time running out on their survival. Time running out on the truth of this signal. Could it be their salvation? Or was it just another cruel twist of fate in a universe that had turned its back on them? One thing was certain. They could not ignore it. The void might have banished them, but humanity was not ready to be forgotten. Not yet. The signal was their hope, and they would follow it to the ends of the galaxy, wherever it might lead. As the final moments of the broadcast crackled into silence, they held their breath. The signal was gone. And then, in the silence, they waited, hoping for something, anything, that would reveal the truth. In the silence of the void, humanity's desperation began to morph into something else, a burning desire to survive, to fight back. The mysterious signal had sparked something deep within them, something far more than hope. It was a call to action. For so long, they had been at the mercy of forces much larger than themselves, but now, for the first time since being cast away, they felt something shift. The galaxy may have believed they were finished, but humanity had always been at its best when faced with the impossible. The ships, once on the brink of collapse, began to hum with renewed life. The engineers and technicians, working tirelessly, adapted what little they had left. The signal, though still weak and distant, had given them a purpose. They were no longer just surviving. They were preparing for something. The question, though, was what exactly? They still knew nothing about who or what had sent the signal. Was it an ally reaching out, or a warning from something far more dangerous? But that didn't matter for the moment. Humanity had learned to rely on its ingenuity, and they were now focused on one singular goal, building a ship capable of taking them back into the galaxy, back to where they belonged. The old ships were patched up as best as they could, but it was clear that what they had was not enough. To face whatever challenges awaited them, they needed more, much more. So, the humans turned to their most valuable asset, creativity. Working with the limited resources they had, they began constructing a new vessel, one that could travel farther than anything they had ever built before. This ship was not just for survival. It would be a weapon, a statement. Weeks turned into months as the crew worked around the clock, their hearts fueled by the thought of revenge. The signal from the void, no matter how cryptic, had ignited a fire within them that could not be extinguished. They were going to return, not as helpless exiles, but as a force to be reckoned with. Humanity's pride, once broken by betrayal, was now tempered with something far stronger: determination. But as the ship took shape, so did the threats. The mysterious signal had been a blessing, yes, but it also stirred up something unsettling. Humanity was not alone in the void. Other ships had detected the signal too, and they were closing in. Ships that were not human, ships that had been sent to investigate, or perhaps to silence them. They had no idea who these forces were, but the idea of facing off against an unknown enemy only drove their resolve further. The humans worked tirelessly, knowing they had no choice but to finish the ship before it was too late. But even as they forged ahead, The thought lingered. Was this an opportunity or a trap? The signal had led them to this point, but its origin remained a mystery. They couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. And if they were being watched, what was it that watched back? Finally, the ship was ready. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A massive, gleaming structure built not just for speed and survival, but for war. The humans had poured everything they had into its design, using every scrap of technology they could scavenge. It was an unspoken declaration that they had not been forgotten. This ship, their ship, was proof of their resilience. Proof that humanity could build something from nothing, even in the harshest of conditions. But just as they prepared to launch, the first attack came. It was sudden. It was brutal. The unknown ships, those that had been circling in the shadows, struck without warning. No words, no negotiations, just a powerful assault meant to destroy everything in their path. The humans were not ready for this. Their ship, though powerful, had only just been completed, but they had no choice. They couldn't back down now. The humans fought back, scrambling to defend their fragile new vessel. The battle was chaotic, a desperate scramble to hold onto the only thing that could take them out of the void. Despite the overwhelming odds, there was no fear in their hearts. They had been cast aside, forgotten, and now they had something to prove. They would not let their enemies tear down what they had built. Not now, not ever. As the battle raged on, the humans began to realize something important. These enemies were not simply attacking. They were testing them, watching them. And the humans were passing the test. Their resilience, their resourcefulness, was stronger than ever before. The galaxy may have laughed at them when they were cast into the void, but now they were about to learn that humanity was far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. With every strike, every counterattack, the humans grew stronger. Their new ship, still in its early stages, held together, proving the strength of their resolve. As they fought back, they realized something chilling. The galaxy was not the same as it had been before. It had changed. And whatever forces had sent them here, whatever was watching, they would soon learn that humanity was no longer a forgotten species. They were becoming something new. The signal, though faint and distant, had been the spark. But humanity, with its unstoppable will and unyielding spirit, was the fire. The unknown enemy would soon learn that the void had not broken them. It had made them stronger. And now, humanity would take the fight back to the galaxy. They were no longer lost. They were ready to make their mark on the stars. The battle was far from over, but in the darkness of space, one thing was clear. Humanity was back, and they were not going to be ignored again. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but they would soon find out. The battle with the mysterious enemy had been brutal, but humanity had emerged stronger. Their new ship, though battered and still far from perfect, had proven its worth. It had survived its first test, and now it was time for humanity to take the next step. The void, once a place of isolation and despair, now felt like a gateway, a doorway into something much greater. The human crew, bruised but unbroken, stood together on the bridge of their vessel, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The unknown had become their new home. They had no idea what dangers lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They were no longer just survivors. They were now warriors, and their enemies would learn to fear them. As the ship's engines powered up, there was a palpable sense of anticipation. The galaxy had cast them into the void, but humanity was proving that the void was not a prison. It was a forge. The fire that had almost destroyed them had instead made them stronger, and now they would use their new strength to shape their destiny. They had no allies, no known friends. They had no idea who had sent the signal that had drawn them to this point, nor what their enemies' true intentions were. But it didn't matter. Humanity had been alone before. They had been forgotten, discarded like old tools. But now, they were a force to be reckoned with. The captain, a grizzled veteran of wars long past, stood at the helm, his hand steady on the controls. His eyes, though tired, gleamed with determination. "We're going to make it," he muttered to himself, though everyone on the bridge could hear him. "We're going to show them what humanity is made of." The ship slowly moved out of its hiding place, gliding silently through the void. The engines hummed beneath their feet as they made their way toward the unknown. There was no map, no clear path forward, but they didn't need one. They were driven by something much stronger than fear, revenge, pride, and the unrelenting will to survive. As they moved farther into the vast emptiness, the crew worked with a renewed sense of urgency. They were making history. Every click of a switch, every command issued, was one more step toward reclaiming their place in the galaxy. But as they ventured deeper, the feeling of being watched never left them. The same chill that had run down their spines when they first received the signal crept back again. They weren't alone. And now, they would have to face whatever or whoever had been watching them all this time. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the screen. A ship, a massive one, appeared on their radar. It was unlike anything the humans had ever seen, a sleek and imposing vessel. The markings on it were unfamiliar, the language undecipherable. It was close, far too close for comfort, and it was moving toward them. The crew went silent. No one spoke. The captain's hand hovered over the controls, ready for whatever came next. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone knew that this could be it. The moment of truth. Would this unknown ship be their ally, or was it a new enemy? The ship loomed larger and larger on the screen, its shape becoming clearer as it approached. But just before they could make any move, the ship stopped. It hovered in place, as if waiting for something. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. The captain gritted his teeth and made a decision. "Prepare for communication," he ordered, though the uncertainty was evident in his voice. What could this ship want? Why had it appeared now? The communication system flickered to life, and a strange voice crackled through the speakers. The language was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable. It was commanding, cold, but there was something else in it too. Curiosity. "Human vessel, you are not what we expected." The crew exchanged confused glances. It was a statement, not a question. And the word sent a shockwave through the crew. Whoever this was, they had been watching humanity for some time. They had expected something from the humans, but what? And why were they speaking to them now? "Who are you?" the captain asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. There was a long pause, and then the voice responded, almost amused. "We are the Lorathan. You are an anomaly. You do not belong here." A ripple of unease swept through the crew. The Lorathan. Humanity had never heard of them, but the name carried weight. The void had always been a place where only the bold dared to venture, but now they were face to face with an entity that had lived here for untold eons. "Why are you here?" the captain pressed, his grip tightening on the control panel. The voice responded, "We have watched you. You should have died long ago. But instead, you adapt. You grow. You have something powerful. Tell us, human, how did you survive the void?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Humanity's survival had been nothing short of a miracle, but they had no intention of revealing all their secrets. Not yet. They had come too far to give up their advantage now. The captain glanced at his crew, each face lit by the glow of the communication panel. He knew the answer they wanted to hear. It was a question of power, of dominance, but humanity had something the Lorathan did not: desperation, determination, and the will to fight. And with that, humanity had already won the first battle in their quest to return to the galaxy. "We survived," the captain said, his voice calm but resolute, "because we're human, and we don't give up." The Lorathan's voice crackled with static before responding. "We shall see." With that, the connection was abruptly severed. The ship remained where it was, motionless, as the crew stood in silence. What had just happened? Who were these beings, and what did they want? Whatever the answers were, the crew knew one thing for certain. This encounter was just the beginning. The galaxy had no idea what humanity was capable of, and they were about to find out. You said. Humanity had barely caught its breath after the strange encounter with the Lorathan when the next challenge emerged. The tension that followed the abrupt end of the communication had been thick, but it didn't last long. The crew quickly got back to work, analyzing the data that had come through and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The captain, still gripping the console, looked out into the vastness of space. Something told him that the Lorathan weren't just a passing obstacle. This was bigger. This was a test. The unknown vessel loomed ahead, motionless, like a dark sentinel in the void. The communication screen remained silent, but the feeling of being watched never went away. The Lorathan were waiting, observing, and it felt like they were sizing humanity up, trying to understand them. But for what purpose? Captain, we need to understand what they want, Lieutenant Hannah said, her voice filled with urgency. They've been watching us. They've seen us survive. But they also said we were an anomaly. That could mean anything. The captain turned to her, his eyes narrowing. I know. But we don't have enough to go on. We don't even know if they're enemies or not. Hannah didn't reply, but her expression was one of concern. The crew was nervous, but they were also ready. The ship, though still scared from its previous battles, was intact. The crew was strong. They had come this far, surviving in the void, adapting, building, learning from their mistakes. They weren't going to back down now. The captain turned back to the communications panel, his fingers hovering over the controls. There was a hesitation. He was a man of few words, but he knew that humanity's future rested on how he handled this moment. Should they continue with cautious diplomacy, or should they show their strength and demand answers? He chose neither. Instead, he sent a simple message. We're coming closer. We want to talk. There was no response for several long minutes, and the crew watched in silence, waiting for something, anything. Then the voice crackled through the speakers again, the tone as cold as ever, but there was a hint of something new. Curiosity, perhaps. Human vessel, your confidence is admirable, the Lorathan voice said. But confidence will not save you. Your species is destined for destruction. You are too fragile, too weak. The void will consume you, just as it has consumed all who came before. The captain's grip on the console tightened, but he didn't flinch. The Lorathan were trying to break them, trying to intimidate them into submission. They were testing humanity, pushing them to see if they would crumble under the weight of doubt. Maybe, the captain responded, his voice calm and unwavering. But we've already survived the void. We're not afraid of it. The Lorathan's silence hung in the air. It felt like the entire ship was holding its breath. And then, a single word came through the speakers, chilling and final. Prove it. The connection was severed. The crew stood in stunned silence. Prove it. What did that mean? Was this a challenge, a game? Or was it something far more dangerous? Whatever it was, they couldn't afford to wait and wonder. The Lorathan had given them an ultimatum, and there was no turning back now. They had to face it head-on. The captain stood tall, his eyes never leaving the dark expanse of space. Prepare for anything, he said, his voice low and steady. Whatever this is, we're ready. We've been ready since the moment we were cast into the void. But as the crew scrambled to get the ship in motion, an unexpected twist caught them off guard. The void, which had once been a place of silence and emptiness, suddenly came alive. The sensors went haywire, and strange, shimmering lights appeared all around them. The ship shuddered, and an eerie hum filled the air. Something was happening, something far beyond their understanding. Captain, shouted Lieutenant Hannah, her voice filled with alarm. The energy readings, they're off the charts. It's like the void itself is alive. The captain's heart raced. This was no longer just about survival. This was about something much bigger. The Lorathan had warned them, but now they had to face the unknown forces that lurked in the void, and they had no idea what those forces were capable of. Suddenly, the ship was caught in a massive gravitational pull. It wasn't just the void, it was something else. A massive, unseen force that seemed to be tugging at them from all directions. The ship's engines roared in defiance, struggling to hold their ground, but the force was too much. The crew was thrown into a state of chaos as the ship twisted and turned, the hull groaning under the strain. "Brace for impact," the captain shouted, grabbing hold of a nearby console. The crew scrambled to secure themselves, but it was no use. The ship was caught in the grip of something powerful, something ancient. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the gravitational pull stopped. The ship was thrown into stillness, floating in the darkness of the void once more. The lights on the console flickered, and the hum of the engines slowly died down. The crew was shaken, their nerves frayed, but they were alive. They had survived, for now. But the question remained, what had just happened? And more importantly, what were the Lorathan trying to test them for? The captain's eyes narrowed. They had passed the first test, but the game was far from over. Something far bigger was at play, and humanity was about to find out just how dangerous this game could be. "We keep moving forward," the captain said, his voice unwavering. "We survive, we fight, and we prove to them that we are not weak." The crew nodded, determination hardening in their hearts. They would prove it, no matter the cost. The void had become humanity's prison, and yet it had also transformed into their greatest challenge. The crew of the Endurance was no longer just fighting for survival. They were battling the very fabric of space itself. The mysterious force that had briefly taken hold of their ship now hung in the air like a shadow, something unseen but ever-present. The Lorathan's words echoed in the captain's mind. "Prove it." But how? The captain stood on the bridge, staring out into the dark expanse, his thoughts racing. The crew had begun to adjust to their new reality, learning to make do with limited resources, forging alliances with species that once saw humanity as insignificant. But this was different. The challenge presented by the Lorathan was unlike any threat they had faced before. "Captain," Lieutenant Hannah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "We're detecting something strange. It's coming from the far side of the void, but the readings don't match anything we've ever encountered." The captain turned to the monitor as the display flickered with odd readings. The strange, shimmering lights from before were becoming more frequent, like the glow of distant stars, but they weren't natural. They seemed to pulse, shifting in patterns that made no sense to the human eye. "We're not alone," the captain muttered. His gut told him that whatever they had encountered before was just the beginning. The crew's nerves were on edge. The Endurance had never felt so isolated. There were no other ships nearby, no familiar stars to navigate by, just darkness and uncertainty. The tension was almost palpable. "Send a probe," the captain ordered, trying to focus on something he could control. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Moments later, the small scout probe was launched into the depths of the void, disappearing into the flickering lights. The crew watched intently as the probe transmitted back data, but it wasn't long before the signals grew weak, distorted, and finally, lost. "Damn it," Hannah cursed under her breath, frustration creeping into her voice. "The signal's gone. It just vanished." The captain clenched his fists, the silence in the room thick with frustration. It wasn't just the probe that had vanished. Something was out there, something they couldn't see, something that was interfering with their every move. "We're being tested," the captain said, his voice low. "This is no random anomaly. Someone, or something, is watching us." The crew fell into uneasy silence. They had survived the destruction of Earth. They had endured months in the void. But this, the darkness, the strange forces, was something they couldn't comprehend. Humanity was being pushed to the very edge. Suddenly, the lights on the bridge flickered, and the air grew cold. It was as though the void itself had crept into their ship. A deep hum filled the silence, an eerie sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Report," the captain barked, but there was no answer. All communications were dead. Every system on the ship was failing. The hum grew louder, more intense. Then, the lights blinked out entirely. The Endurance was plunged into total darkness. The only sounds were the pounding of the crew's hearts, their breath ragged as they fumbled to turn on emergency lights. The hum continued, growing in frequency and intensity, as if the very core of the ship was resonating with the void. "Get the lights back on," the captain ordered, but no one could respond. The systems were completely offline. It was as if they were trapped in a nightmare. Then, without warning, a blinding light engulfed the room, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The light grew brighter, until it was impossible to see anything. It felt as if the ship itself was being torn apart. The crew struggled to hold on to something, anything, but there was no escape from the overwhelming force. The captain's thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The Lorathan had given them a challenge. But this wasn't just a test. This was a trial designed to break them. And just as quickly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The emergency lights flickered back on, and the system slowly came back online. The ship groaned, as if it had just barely survived some unseen force. The crew was shaken but alive. They had been through many challenges in the void, but this was something new. The captain exhaled sharply, his voice low but steady. What the hell was that? Hannah stood at the console, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to make sense of the data. It's not clear. The ship's systems show a massive energy surge, like something very powerful passed through us, but there's no record of what it was. It's like it never existed. The captain's eyes narrowed. "The Lorathan's trial," he muttered, the pieces clicking together. "They're pushing us. They want us to prove that we belong." The crew stared at the captain, their faces filled with fear and determination. They had come this far. They had survived the void. But now, they were facing something even more terrifying. An enemy they couldn't see. A challenge they couldn't predict. The stakes were higher than ever. "They think we're weak," the captain continued, his voice growing more resolute. "They think we'll break. But we're not going to. We'll survive whatever they throw at us." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. The void had become their battleground, and the Lorathan had cast their gauntlet. But humanity would not back down. They had come too far to fail now. "Prepare for the next challenge," the captain ordered. "Whatever it is, we face it head-on. We prove that we belong here." And as the Endurance sailed deeper into the unknown, humanity's trial in the void was only beginning. The Endurance was battered, its systems pushed to their breaking point. Every part of the ship felt as though it had been tested, stretched, and now it was time to see if humanity could endure the most critical test of all. The void was no longer just a place. It had become an adversary, one that didn't want them to survive. But there was something more, something beneath the surface of the void's oppressive emptiness, something that was slowly beginning to stir. The crew had been recovering from the last trial, trying to piece together what had happened when the ship had been engulfed in that blinding light. But no answers were coming. There were no records, no signs of what had passed through them. Just a profound emptiness, like they had been touched by something ancient and unknowable. "Captain, you need to see this." Lieutenant Hannah's voice cut through the silence on the bridge. The captain approached the console, his face lined with exhaustion, but still determined. "What is it?" On the screen, a strange pattern of lights flickered into view. It wasn't like the static pulse from before. This was different. These were coherent, rhythmic. It looked like a massive signal, one that pulsed through the void, a pulse that seemed to travel directly toward them. "Is it the Lorathan?" the captain asked, though he already knew the answer. The Lorathan had shown their power. But this was something else. No, Hannah replied, her voice trembling. It's too organized. The Lorathan's signals were erratic, sporadic. This is something designed, something intelligent. The captain stared at the signal, feeling a strange, unsettling pull deep within him. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever was sending this signal wasn't a random force of nature. It was a message, and it was meant for humanity. Bring it up on full screen, he ordered. The lights on the bridge dimmed as the signal expanded, filling every corner of the screen. It was a massive spiral of light, like a galactic symbol etched into the fabric of the void itself. As it spiraled, it seemed to move, almost alive, drawing closer to them with an unnatural speed. For a moment, the captain felt as though they were staring into the heart of the universe, something vast, unfathomable, ancient, and powerful. What is this? The captain whispered, his heart racing. He couldn't help but feel both awe and fear in the same breath. This was no normal signal. This was something that could change everything. Suddenly, the signal fractured, and a voice, deep and resonating, filled the bridge. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, an intelligence, ancient and vast, speaking directly into their minds. You have found us, humans. You have traveled beyond the edge of the universe and found the path to the heart of all that is. Do you truly seek to understand what you have discovered? The captain's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a signal anymore. This was communication. They were not alone in the void. They had awoken something far greater than themselves. Hannah's fingers hovered over the controls. What should we say, Captain? The question hung in the air, unanswered, for several moments. The captain's mind raced as the enormity of the situation sunk in. The Lorathan had challenged humanity. But this was something else entirely. It was not just a trial, but an invitation. An invitation to something that could reshape the galaxy, or end humanity's existence. We ask for the knowledge you hold, the captain finally spoke, his voice steady, but filled with a sense of trepidation. We seek understanding. Help us find our place in the galaxy. There was a long pause. The ship seemed to hold its breath as the signal spiraled outward. Then the voice came again, softer this time, almost approving. You seek knowledge. You seek understanding. Very well. But know this, humans. There is a price for such knowledge. A price you may not be ready to pay. The word hung in the air, chilling everyone on the bridge. The cost of what they had asked for was unknown, but one thing was certain. It would not come without consequences. Suddenly, the signal cut off. The lights on the bridge flickered once more, and the hum of the ship's systems seemed to grow louder, more intense. The crew looked around, confused and unsure of what to do next. Captain, Hannah said, her voice low. There's something else. I'm detecting an object. Something massive. It's moving in our direction. The captain's eyes narrowed as he turned to the screen. The signal had led them here, but it wasn't just a path to knowledge. It was a path that led to something far more dangerous. Is it the source of the signal? The captain asked. Possibly, Hannah replied, but her voice had an edge of fear. It's huge, Captain. Bigger than anything we've ever seen. And it's moving fast. The captain clenched his fists, staring at the data scrolling across the screen. They had been drawn into something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The mysterious force that had first captured their attention in the void was not some isolated event. It was the beginning of something much greater. We're not alone, the captain muttered, and I don't think we ever were. The crew stood in silence, feeling the weight of the words. The void had revealed its true nature, and now humanity had a choice. They could turn back and fight for survival, or they could face the unknown and learn the terrible truths that lay ahead. But one thing was certain. No matter the cost, humanity had awakened something ancient and powerful in the depths of the void. and it was coming for them. The Endurance lurched violently as an intense gravitational wave washed over them, its force enough to rattle every compartment on the ship. The bridge lights flickered wildly, and a low hum filled the air as the crew struggled to maintain their footing. The captain gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white. "What the hell is happening?" Lieutenant Hannah shouted, trying to stabilize her station. The object that had appeared on their scanners just moments before was no longer a mere dot in the distance. It was here, looming over them. Massive. An incomprehensible structure that looked almost alive. It pulsed, sending waves of energy toward the Endurance, pushing the ship to its limits. "We can't outrun it," shouted Lieutenant Mason, his voice filled with fear. "Whatever it is, it's moving too fast. We're trapped." The captain's eyes darted across the control panels, his mind working quickly. The mysterious signal had led them straight into the path of this enormous entity. But why? What did it want from them? And what price would they have to pay to survive? "Get us ready for evasive maneuvers," the captain ordered, his voice calm but firm. He turned to his tactical officer. "Lock onto any weak points. We need to find a way to fight back." The ship shook again, even harder this time, as though the very space around them was being bent and twisted by an unseen hand. The crew had never faced something like this before. The power emanating from the approaching entity was staggering. It wasn't just a force of nature, it was a force of purpose, a consciousness that had set its sights on them. "Captain, we've got incoming fire," Hannah called out, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Return fire. Full power to forward cannons." The captain snapped. There was no time to second-guess. This was a fight for survival, and they were outmatched. But even as they unleashed their weapons, the entity didn't seem to flinch. The lasers and energy pulses shot toward it, but they dissipated like raindrops on a wall of stone. The ship's sensors barely registered a response. It was as if the entity was invincible. "Captain," Mason said urgently, "it's not just a ship. I think it's a living being. A massive one. The energy, it's biological. The signal, it's coming from inside." The captain's heart skipped a beat. A living being. That was impossible, wasn't it? No known life form could exist at such a scale. But as he looked at the screen, the pulsing glow of the entity did indeed seem organic. The patterns it emitted were not random. They were deliberate, structured, intentional. The voice echoed through the ship again, deeper this time, shaking them to their core. It wasn't just a message, it was a command. "You have reached the boundaries of the unknown, humans. You have trespassed into the realm of the ancient and the eternal. You are not meant to be here. But now that you are, there will be no turning back. Your fate is sealed." The captain's chest tightened as the message hit him. There was no escape. This was no ordinary encounter. This was an inevitable conclusion to a journey that had led them far beyond the safety of known space. But even as fear crept into the hearts of the crew, the captain's mind began to clear. They weren't the first species to face this entity. They couldn't be. If there was one thing humanity had learned, it was that no situation was without hope. The Endurance had already survived things that no other ship or species could imagine. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. It would not end here. "Listen to me," the captain said, his voice rising above the panic. "We've been through worse. We've faced enemies stronger, smarter, and deadlier than we could have ever imagined. But we survived, and we'll survive this too." He looked at his crew, meeting their eyes one by one. "We fight, we adapt, and we win. That's what we do. That's who we are." The crew nodded, the fear in their eyes replaced by something else. Determination. They had no idea what this being was, or why they were being confronted by it, but they knew one thing. Humanity would not go down without a fight. "Initiate Phase 3 of the countermeasures," the captain ordered, his voice steady. "Activate the quantum disruptor. If we can't kill it, Maybe we can disrupt its control over this region of space. As the crew scrambled to follow orders, the captain's eyes never left the enormous entity on the view screen. It was only a few moments away now. The air on the bridge was thick with tension, every heartbeat heavier than the last. Then, just as the quantum disruptor came online, the ship suddenly lurched forward with terrifying speed, far faster than any system should have allowed. "Captain," Hannah shouted, her voice filled with panic. "Something's pulling us in. We can't break free." The entity had caught them. It had pulled them into its grasp. The ship's systems began to sputter and die, one by one. The lights flickered, and the air grew thin. They were being dragged into the heart of this monstrous being, into the unknown. But as the Endurance was pulled toward the event horizon, something incredible happened. The quantum disruptor activated. A wave of energy rippled out from the ship, surrounding the Endurance in a shimmering bubble. The entity pulsed again, but this time the glow began to dim, flickering in confusion. For the first time since it had appeared, it seemed to lose control. With a roar that shook the fabric of space itself, the Endurance broke free, tearing itself from the grasp of the entity, but at a cost. The ship's systems were on the verge of collapse, and the crew barely managed to escape. "Did we do it?" Mason asked, his voice shaky. The captain looked out the view screen, seeing the massive shape of the entity begin to drift into the distance. It wasn't pursuing them. "Not yet. We survived," the captain said, barely believing the words. "But this is just the beginning. We've awakened something ancient, something beyond our understanding, and it won't stop until it has what it wants." The crew watched the darkness of space ahead of them, knowing their journey was far from over. They had entered the void, and in doing so, they had unleashed a force that would change the galaxy forever. And humanity was no longer just a species that survived. It was now a species that would change the course of the universe forever.